Life used to feel simple and predictable. My twin brother Lance and I were always in competition, despite being twins. Our parents, with a sense of humor, named us Arthur and Lance, like knights of legend. However, our relationship was anything but straightforward. Lance, with his effortless charm and athleticism, always seemed to excel, while I, the older twin by 2 minutes, struggled to gain recognition. It's interesting how childhood dynamics can shape your entire life. When I think about my marriage to Paige, I realize it mirrored that competition, constantly chasing something just out of reach. When we met, she seemed perfect, smart, beautiful, and driven. We built a life together, had kids, and bought a Suburban. We had stable jobs, but over time, something essential was missing. Instead of loving each other, we were just going through the motions. I was so stressed out that my body gave out, and I vomited violently, releasing more than just fast food. It was the pent-up pain and bitterness I had been holding on to. It had been too long since I'd faced up to the reality of my broken marriage. Paige followed me outside, barefoot, pleading. I shook her off and yelled at her to leave me alone as I sped away, drowning her voice with the car's engine in the rearview mirror. I saw her standing there in her bathrobe, arms crossed, looking worried, but not enough to. The realization that there was no love left between us hurt more than catching her in the act minutes earlier. It wasn't a new revelation, just an old truth I had avoided facing at Lance's apartment. He greeted me with concern, but I brushed past him and collapsed on the couch. His messy apartment I was annoyed by the dirty dishes and clothes strewn everywhere. Lance had been playing video games when I arrived. Typical Lance. "Everything okay, bro?" he asked, nudging me. I ignored him and he eventually returned to his game. Finally, I snapped. "Are you supposed to be at work without looking away from the screen?" he replied. I couldn't believe he was just sitting there playing video games while my life was falling apart. Why did things come so easily to him while I carried all the weight? I was surprised at myself for exploding. "Can you turn that crap off?" "What are you, 16? Lance shrugged and kept playing. "What's the problem?" he asked calmly. That's how Lance handled everything, nothing ever fazed him. My rage boiled over. I grabbed his controller and smashed it against the wall. "What the hell?" Art yelled. "What's wrong with you?" I shouted, poking him in the chest. "You're what's wrong with me. If you got a problem, leave this. Is my place? Go back home to your wife." I snapped, as we'd fought before, but this time was different, fueled by anger. I attacked again, but Lance was always stronger and easily overpowered me. When I came to, I heard Lance on the phone. "I don't know what's wrong with him," he said, seeing me awake. "I don't know what's wrong with him." He smirked, and gave me an ice pack. "You're acting like an idiot. Why did you call Paige? She's your wife. She should deal with you." "I don't care. I can't talk to her right now." His expression softened. "What's going on, Art? You come over here and swing at me." "What?" I told him about the day's events, the sick feeling after a bad meal, deciding to work from home, and the unexpected discovery that shattered my world. I didn't expect Paige to be home, and the strange car outside didn't raise alarms. I was too focused on reaching the bathroom, unaware that my life I was about to change forever as I finished recounting the story. Lance grew serious, which was out of character for him. He yelled, "Screw her." I chuckled, but it was dark humor. That's what that guy was doing, ignoring my comment. Lance started pacing. "Who is this guy? Do we know him?" he asked. He paused, looking worried. "Tell me it's not Brian," he said. "No, not Brian, but the guy." I looked familiar. A knock at the door interrupted us. It was Paige. He left, and when he returned, I gave him a grateful smile. We spent the rest of the afternoon in silence. Eventually, I knew I had to face Paige. Staying away was just delaying the inevitable. When I got home, everything seemed normal, almost as if it had all been a bad dream. But it wasn't. Paige tried to talk. We should talk. She said, I'm sorry. I sighed and stayed silent. She apologized, but it felt hollow. It was more about how I found out than the betrayal itself. I threw her words back at her, mocking her empty apology. We argued about everything but the core issue. We avoided talking about the real pain. Eventually, I asked how long it had been since we had sex. She hesitated, saying, "What does that have to do with anything?" It was like I was just doing her a favor. I said, "But that guy gets enthusiasm." She didn't answer, and I knew I was just trying to provoke her. I wanted her to feel something, anything close to how I felt, but she couldn't because I hadn't cheated. I had kept my vows. After a tense silence, I finally asked, "Do you still love me, Paige?" She hesitated, and I realized she didn't love me anymore. I was exhausted, so I got up to leave. She grabbed my hand and said, "Don't run away. We need to finish this." I pulled away and said, "What's left to say?" "You don't love me." "That's not what I said." She insisted, "I know you're hurt, and I regret it. But you're twisting my words because you understand me so well." I sneered, "When did you stop loving me, before or after you started cheating? Because I don't remember you ever mentioning it." She narrowed her eyes. "Being an idiot won't make this easier." "My mistake. I didn't realize how tough this was for you." I responded sarcastically. She started to respond but stopped. Her patience was finally gone. "You know what? Artie, you're right. I should stop apologizing. You'll just twist everything I say." I couldn't resist one more jab. This was it. Her face hardened and she smirked. "Yes, I was sparing your feelings. I wasn't going to tell you that you're a boring, overweight man who's terrible in bed. Or that the last time we had fun was before I got pregnant, but since you insist," her words cut deep. "I wanted the truth, but not like this." So I retaliated. "Well, when your wife just lies there like a blow-up doll, what do you expect?" She delivered the final blow. "If you'd seen me with Derek, you'd know what I'm like with a man who knows what he's doing." That really hit home for me. My pride was shattered. I was speechless. Her words kept echoing in my head. Seeing my reaction, her anger shifted to regret. "Artie, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it." She began, but I left the room before she could finish. The next morning, I woke up in the guest room, disoriented. I was late for work. I kept thinking about what she'd said, boring overweight man. I'd always thought my life was pretty good. I had a decent job, a nice house and kids in private school, but apparently that wasn't enough for her. She wanted someone who wasn't me. I left the bathroom and went to work. Paige and I crossed paths in the hallway. She said, "I need to wake Josh." I replied, "Okay," and we went our separate ways. I was relieved to leave the house at work. I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting back to Paige and her affair. Her words kept ringing in my ears. "If you really saw me with Derek, you'd know what. I'm with a man who knows what he's doing." My phone buzzed with a text from Paige last night. "We need to talk without the petty nonsense." Anger flared, but I didn't lash out. I simply replied, "Agreed. We'll talk tonight." Her response came quickly. "Okay, see you then." At work, I couldn't shake her cruel words. I also visited a store manager who was working with a young guy named Phil. I couldn't help but compare myself to her when I saw how fit he was. When I asked Phil how he stayed fit, he gave me a gym card, suggesting I'd check it out. I put it in my wallet, unsure if I'd ever use it at home. Paige and I sat in silence until I finally asked why. I could see a tear slipping down her cheek. I said, "We've lost the spark." I was clenching my teeth. I asked, "Do you think I'm good in bed?" She shook her head sadly. I said, "I'm sorry for what I said yesterday. I was angry." "Is it true?" She didn't answer. Why didn't she? "I'd like to know why you didn't speak up for so long." I tried to initiate a conversation, but it made no difference, so I decided I had no right to be unhappy. I was surprised to hear you say I was bad in bed, but I did mention your weight. She replied defensively, asking how she was supposed to know. I knew that meant you were unhappy in our marriage. I replied, I thought it was just a phase. Why didn't you try to fix us? She shot back, I wasn't the one cheating. I replied sharply, if you were so unhappy, you should have spoken up. You didn't just step out after a moment of silence. She quietly said, I think we should get a divorce. Her words echoed in my mind. It made sense, but love isn't logical. I felt a surge of anger, not just about the cheating, but because I wasn't the one suggesting the split. I should have been the one to end it, but I was still holding on to hope. I think we should, I said sarcastically. Never mind the twins. It's the right decision to get a divorce because you need sex. Come on, Artie. You said you were unhappy too. Yeah, but I started to argue, but realized it was pointless. She was done and I needed to get away. This time, when I left, she didn't stop me as I was about to leave. One last question burned in my mind without turning. I asked who that guy was. She said his name was Derek. He works with me. I whispered, recalling him from an office party 2 years ago. I could tell she was thinking the same thing. She quickly responded, we weren't sleeping together. I scoffed, I guess that's something. You were flirting, right? What does it matter, Artie? She asked sadly. It matters to me. She rolled her eyes. Fine, there was some attraction, maybe flirting, but it was just office banter. Things didn't get serious until we started meeting at the gym. I muttered venomously, that's when. You decided to wreck our marriage because I'm just the boring fat guy, Artie. She whined, but I ignored her. He's great in bed. Those were your words. I just repeated, I'm sorry, I said those things. I'm tired of her hollow apologies. I muttered and walked out. I drove. I went straight to my brother's place. He took one look at me and stepped aside, saying he'd stay over. I nodded, and he came back with a blanket. I thanked him and said, no problem, just don't act like an idiot or I'll knock you out again. He joked and went to bed. I spread the blanket on the couch, undressed and washed up, and caught up on some work. I looked in the mirror and shook my head. I walked out and lay on the couch, wondering how my life had come to this. I did everything right, worked hard, and stayed loyal. But here I was, crashing on my brother's couch like I was the one who messed up. Sleep was elusive. My mind kept replaying scenes. I kept seeing images of Paige and Derek, not just in bed but at the gym and work, laughing and flirting. Those images hurt more than what I saw in the shower. Did they ever talk about me or compare us? The thoughts stung deeply. I finally dozed off, only to wake when Lance started getting ready for work. He grabbed a yogurt and he ate it standing up in the kitchen, looking like a college kid. I held back my thoughts. After all, I was crashing at his place with no plans to leave anytime soon. Are you going to work today? He asked. I don't know, I replied. Before you leave, Art, don't let that woman make you feel bad. There are plenty of other women out there. I didn't respond to his advice, though it was well-intentioned. He didn't seem to understand the difference between my 12-year marriage and his short-lived one. Flings were always easier for Lance. He had the looks and charm, while I worked hard for everything. I stayed with Lance for a week before we both needed space. Paige texted me several times, asking where I was and if I was coming back. I ignored her until she mentioned the twins had questions. I knew I had to face the kids, so I went home. I planned to go when the house was empty, but when I pulled into the driveway, PA's car was already there, inside. I found her in the bedroom packing my clothes. You're finally back, she said. What are you doing with my clothes? I asked. I wasn't sure you were coming back. I came back, so I started packing them to save you the trouble. You knew where I was, Paige. You left me to handle the kids alone. I have every right to be angry. Did you ever love me? I asked, honestly. I did and I still do, she replied, implying that love had changed. Realizing nothing could be salvaged, I said, I'll move my stuff to the guest room. She nodded sadly, trying to lighten the mood. I added, I'm getting a new bed. For that room, she chuckled. You bought that uncomfortable bed to keep Lance from staying too long. Well, that plan backfired. We moved my clothes in silence, agreeing to an unspoken truce. The rest of the day passed in cold politeness. That evening, we sat the twins down to explain what was watching my kids struggle with the news was almost unbearable. I couldn't even look at Paige knowing she was the cause of all this pain. Over the next few weeks, life just dragged on. I contacted a lawyer who told me we'd have to be separated for a year before filing for divorce. We agreed on a separation agreement. We agreed to separate for a while to work out the details. After 2 weeks, I moved out and found a new place to live. It was a bit of a downer at first, but then I saw a commercial for the gym Phil had recommended. I decided to check it out when I arrived. When I arrived, I immediately felt out of place, but Naomi, the manager, greeted me warmly and convinced me to take a tour. I was hesitant but curious, so I agreed. During the gym tour, Naomi showed me the amenities, but what really caught my eye was a wall of before and after photos. She showed me a picture of me when I first joined. I was pretty blown away. The before photo showed her at about 200 pounds. She explained that she'd gained a lot of weight during her pregnancy. My husband bought her a treadmill for Christmas, which I didn't appreciate at first, but it did help me make a change with my brother. With the help of my in-laws, I lost over 75 pounds. I was genuinely impressed. Arthur, don't feel out of place. We all start somewhere. Maybe one day your picture will be up here too. Her words convinced me, and I signed up for a membership. I started with the beginner program, where a trainer showed me the equipment and gave tips for effective workouts. I then booked one-on-one sessions with a trainer named Manny every Wednesday at 8:00 a.m. To create a personalized workout routine, I also tried various classes. I enjoyed the Thursday biking class, but I found yoga less fun than I'd expected. Meeting others on similar journeys made me feel less alone, while the gym helped me stay sane. Things with Paige only got worse one evening. I visited the kids at our old home and found Paige's niece babysitting. When I asked where Paige was, the niece seemed nervous. I figured Paige was probably out with Derek, so I stayed to spend time with the kids and sent the niece home. Paige came back around 11, surprised to see me. She looked great in her black dress, but her disheveled appearance suggested she hadn't just been out dancing. I told her I came to see the kids since I was there, and I sent Penny home. If I'd known you'd be this late, I wouldn't have, I said. She seemed to gauge my mood. I was really tired and didn't know you were there. I'm sorry, she said, avoiding eye contact. I shook my head and stood up. No worries, it'll happen to everyone, I said, heading for the door as I grabbed my coat. She thanked me for paying Penny. No problem, good night, Paige, I replied, and walked out. Months later, at the gym, I pushed through a tough workout. When I stepped on the scale, I found I'd lost 10 pounds in 3 months and I was pretty frustrated. I stormed out, feeling like life was just plain unfair. Outside, Naomi noticed my mood and asked if everything was okay. Before I knew it, I'd spilled everything, my weight loss struggles, my kids and even Lance. She listened attentively and then asked, "What do you really want, Arthur?" I admitted I wanted to feel good about myself. She explained that losing weight alone won't make you happy. It's about having a healthy self-esteem. Your self-esteem comes from within, not just your looks. You need to know your worth. It's not just about appearance. Her words really resonated with me. She then gave me a card for her brother-in-law. I was also encouraged to give it my all if I chose to work with him. A week later, I met Jerry, who was fit and intimidating. He was professional and warned me that this wouldn't be easy. His approach was strict, no excuses, no exceptions. He even inspected my kitchen and asked personal questions about. Despite his tough demeanor, I agreed to follow his regimen. Jerry's program was intense. The first day I met with a nutritionist who taught me about healthy eating. I learned how much my diet needed to change and started cooking all my meals. The workouts were brutal, but gradually I adjusted. Despite the challenges, I knew I was making progress. I was constantly hungry and exhausted, both physically and mentally. Simple tasks became difficult, and I was constantly tired. All I wanted to do was rest, but I couldn't neglect my kids. Despite the exhaustion, I made time for them. I have to give her credit, she didn't mind if I dropped by the house, even unannounced. Maybe it was guilt, but I believed she genuinely wanted to do what was best for the kids. She insisted I keep the house key. I think the unspoken agreement was that I would respect her privacy. Unfortunately, I didn't hold up my end. Jealousy got the better of me. It started as innocent curiosity, just poking around when I thought I wouldn't get caught. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I was just trying to see how things were without me around. The first odd thing I noticed was a new toothbrush in the bathroom. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I saw men's body wash in the shower and started to worry. There were no men's clothes in the closet, but I found a pair of boxer shorts in her laundry basket. I saw another pair. It felt wrong seeing men's underwear mixed with my wife's things. It was like he was taking over my space. I kept my cool and acted like nothing was wrong. I didn't want her to know I was snooping. Keeping her in the dark seemed like a good way to gather more information. Plus, I wanted to appear unaffected. As if her actions didn't bother me. I also asked the kids if they'd noticed anything unusual. Or if any new people had been visiting. They didn't seem to know what I was talking about. So I assumed Paige was keeping her end of the deal. By not involving them. I also asked the kids if they'd noticed anything unusual or if any new people had been visiting. They didn't seem to know what I was talking about, so I assumed Paige was keeping her end of the deal by not involving them. It seemed like her dates happened while the kids were at school or on nights out, but no matter how hard I tried to hide it, I'm sure Paige sensed my it's hard to hide pain for long. Sometimes she'd give me a guilty look when she caught me watching her. She knew how easily she was moving on while I was stuck in regret. It hurt, and sometimes I couldn't pretend it didn't. Jerry's workouts helped with his barking orders during bench presses or smacking my stomach during sit-ups. My thoughts of Paige were constantly interrupted by other things. Even his sarcastic remarks about my nickname helped me to channel my frustration away from my problems. Like many men in my situation, I found solace in my job. I was valued based on performance, and numbers and results mattered. If something wasn't working, you fixed it. If only marriages were that straightforward. The months passed both quickly and painfully slowly. The days were filled with agony, but pain also reminded me I was still alive. The body has an incredible ability to heal and adapt over time. I grew. I was stronger physically and emotionally, but bit by bit my heart became numb to the situation with Paige. Our relationship shifted so subtly that I didn't notice until it had changed significantly. I realized what had happened a couple of weeks before our separation anniversary. One evening the kids were asleep and I was waiting for Paige to come home so I could leave. I spilled soda on my shirt, so I decided to wash it right away. I assumed Paige wouldn't be back until later, but she surprised me by coming home early. I rushed to the kitchen to grab my shirt from the dryer, feeling self-conscious. I was aware that I didn't want her to see my bare chest, still affected by her past opinions as I struggled to untangle the wet shirt. I didn't notice her until I heard her footsteps stop behind me. I turned to find her staring at me, wide-eyed as if she'd seen something unexpected. Her gaze made me even more anxious, so I tried to cover myself with the twisted shirt. "Hey Paige, how's your night?" I said. I asked, trying to sound casual but also eager for her to stop staring. "It was fine," she replied slowly, still not breaking eye contact. "Okay," I said, feeling the tension in the air. Her eyes seemed to silently compare me to her ex-god. I thought. It took all my remaining pride not to flee the room. Instead, I held my head high and said, "The kids are in bed, dinner's done, and homework's finished." I'm heading out now if you don't mind. I'll use your bathroom before I leave. I quickly left the kitchen. When I got to the bathroom, I finally managed to untangle the shirt before putting it on. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror and was shocked. Just like Paige had been earlier, my apartment only had a small mirror that barely showed enough to shave. I hadn't been paying much attention to my appearance after that. I was really disappointed with what I saw on the scale. I'd been avoiding mirrors altogether, preferring to remain in blissful ignorance. But this mirror was on the wall above the sink, and it reflected my entire torso. I was stunned by what I saw. My chest had definition, and my midsection was noticeably slimmer. The excess fat that used to stick out had flattened my shoulders and made my V-shaped shoulders broader. I wasn't expecting to see a fit physique on a fitness magazine cover, but I looked far better than I had been used to. I saw an attractive man in the mirror, and that man was me. Was this why Paige had been staring at me? Maybe she wasn't disgusted, maybe she was attracted. That moment in her bathroom. It was a turning point for me. It was the first time I actually felt worthy when I left the bathroom. I casually walked past her and said, "All right, Paige, I'm off. Have a good night." Her eyes lingered on me as I left, but this time I didn't shy away from her gaze. I embraced it, though I pretended not to notice. Good night, Artie," she replied. My voice was softer than usual, and I had a newfound confidence. I walked out the door with a bit of a swagger. After that moment in Paige's bathroom, I became more aware of the changes I had made without realizing it. I was constantly comparing myself to how I was when I first started. Some changes were obvious, like my clothes fitting differently and my dress shirt. My collars weren't tight around my neck anymore and my waist size had dropped from 44 to 36. There were other smaller changes, but they were still satisfying. I could bend down and get up more easily, tie my shoes without spreading my legs wide and get in and out of the car without grunting. When Jerry saw me next, he noticed the change in my attitude and the fatigue. I had lifted the weight, felt lighter, the treadmill less daunting, and my energy levels soared. I even found myself checking my reflection more often during workouts. Jerry caught on and couldn't resist teasing me. "Looks like someone finally noticed the results of his hard work." He joked. I laughed. "Yeah, you caught me." "Oh, go ahead and admire yourself," he said, stepping aside dramatically. "I'm not in your way, am I? You look great, by the way." "Thanks for asking," I said, laughing so hard I had to stop lifting. I wouldn't want to stand in the way of love at first sight. For the first time, Jerry called me Your Highness. It was nice to joke around with him. I noticed a change in how people interacted with me. They seemed friendlier, lingered a bit longer when they looked at me, and smiled more. I know it might sound shallow, but I couldn't deny it. Attractive people do get treated better, and I realized that wasn't always the case. She'd been more attentive, smiling more, and even brushing her hair out of her face in a way that felt almost flirtatious. She stopped treating me with pity and started showing me respect. Everything came to a head on our separation anniversary. I'd contacted my lawyer and given the go-ahead to. I was getting ready to send the divorce papers over to Paige. I wanted to give her the option of moving on instead of having them served, which felt impersonal. I decided to give them to her directly. We were in a good place, and I felt that the end of our marriage deserved the same respect as its beginning. That night, I found her upstairs getting ready for another date. She was in front of the mirror putting on earrings. I knocked on the door frame to get her attention. "Hey Artie," she said, turning around and spreading. I looked at her and asked, "How do I look?" "Hey Paige, you look beautiful," she replied. "But I'm sure you already knew that. You didn't tell me you got that promotion. You surprised me by coming home with the dress and the good news." "I remember," I said with a nostalgic smile. We celebrated that night at the new Italian restaurant. Her gaze shifted, and she added softly, "That's also the night we conceived the twins." Pleasant memories flooded my mind, recalling how close we were that night. But suddenly, those happy memories turned dark. I pictured myself struggling to please her while she was half asleep. I had this feeling that there was another man in my mind, even though I didn't remember Dirk's face. The thought of him was haunting me. The room felt heavy with unspoken tension. I shook off the thoughts and said, "I have something for you." I dropped a manila envelope on the bed, and her expression darkened as she looked at it. "Wow, you didn't waste any time getting that ready, did you?" she said bitterly. "Well, it did take me a year," I joked, hoping to lighten the mood. But she didn't laugh or smile. She just turned back to the mirror expressionless, as if the papers didn't matter. "I'll look at them when I get a chance," she said flatly, dismissing me. I left the room, puzzled by her reaction. I didn't expect a celebration, but I thought she'd at least be relieved to start the process. I found Josh first, playing video games in his room. "Is your homework done?" I asked sternly. He turned quickly, guilt written on his face. He almost mumbled, looking away, seeing my expression. He added, "I'll finish it now." "Good choice." I could hear his breath as he turned off the game, but I pretended not to hear. Sometimes it's best to walk away before you have to discipline your kids for something minor. Next, I found Ally in the living room flipping through a photo album. I recognized the cover. It was our wedding album. There was no need to ask about homework, she was always on top of it. I sat next to her and put my arm around her. "Hey Pumpkin, what are you looking at?" I asked. "You're in Mummy's wedding pictures," she replied, pausing on one of me and Lance. "In our tuxedos, you look just the same. You lost all that weight, so you look really handsome now." I teased, laughing as she tried to backtrack after a few seconds. I let her off the hook. "Thanks for the compliment." She smiled and leaned into me, but then her expression turned serious. "Are you and Mommy ever going to get back together?" I sighed, wishing I could avoid this conversation. "No, sweetie. I don't think so." Divorce papers on PA's bed. "Why not?" she asked. "Sometimes adults realize they can't stay married, but that doesn't stop us from loving you." "So you and Mommy don't love each other anymore?" she pressed, seeing through my attempt to soften the truth. "We care about each other, but not like husband and wife. That's why we have to split up, but we'll always be friends." Ally looked sad and turned away. I kissed her forehead, but it felt like a small gesture against her big questions. Explaining divorce to a 9-year-old. I'm 30 years old. It's tough for them. It's simple: if you love each other, you stay together. Why can't life be that straightforward? I used to think so, but everything changed when Derek came along. I sensed someone behind me and turned to see Paige walking away as Ally, and I continued looking through the album. I wondered, I was curious how much of our conversation she had overheard. A few nights later, I decided to attend my weekly biking class. I hadn't been in a while since starting with Jerry, so there were some unfamiliar faces. I spotted a familiar one and took the bike next to her. "Hey Colleen," I greeted cheerfully. She turned and smiled when she recognized me. "Timino, I almost didn't recognize you. You've lost weight, you're looking great. Where have you been?" she teased, her eyes scanning me with appreciation. I blushed. "I've been here just working out at different times. How have we not bumped into each other like I said? You're too good for us now," she joked, nudging me playfully. "Trust me," I said, "you're definitely not fat." Glancing over at her, I realized I was checking her out. I became shy again, unsure whether to apologize or act like it didn't happen. Luckily, the trainer started class, saving me from further embarrassment. After class, as Colleen walked past me, she brushed my shoulder and said, "Don't be a stranger." She smiled playfully. She left the room, and I found myself wondering if she was flirting with me, given that I'd been married for so long. I wasn't sure how to recognize the signs anymore. Over the next few weeks, I kept attending the class just to interact with Colleen. Each time things played out the same way, I became more convinced she was interested in me. I wanted to ask her, I kept on thinking about her, but I kept on stalling every time I saw her. I told myself this was the time to go for it, but I always chickened out at the last moment. Jerry noticed me checking her out a few times, but he didn't say anything. I could tell he knew what was going on. One day, Colleen walked up to me, looking a bit confused, and said, "Your friend over there told me. You had something to ask me," she said, pointing behind her. I saw Jerry in the distance, smiling and winking at me. I mentally cursed him. Yeah," I stammered. She waited patiently, and I finally mustered the courage to go for it. "Would you like to do something together sometime?" she said. She looked thoughtful at first, and I braced myself for. I was met with rejection, but then she smiled brightly and asked, "Are you asking me out?" Her enthusiasm gave me the confidence to respond, "Yes, I am. Would you like to go out with me?" She handed me a piece of paper with her number. "Call me tonight." Seeing my confusion, she laughed. "Your friend bet me you wouldn't ask me out because you were too chicken." "Really?" At Jerry, "Yes, but I had faith in you. Now I'm $10 richer thanks to you. Happy to help. Let me know anytime. I can make him a loser." I joked and we both laughed. She said goodbye and reminded me to call her after 8 as she left. Jerry walked over with a smug look. "What does she want?" he asked, pretending to be clueless. "She came over to tell me what an intrusive a-hole he is," I replied, throwing a towel at him. He laughed and shrugged it off. That night, I faced another dilemma. I hadn't been on a first date in over a decade, so I had no idea where to take Colleen or what to expect. Were the dating rules still the same as when I courted Paige? My mind raced with questions. Dinner, a movie, something more adventurous. Surprisingly, Lance gave the best advice. He said, "I always take a girl somewhere unexpected. Dinner and movies are boring. First dates can get awkward, so do something unique to break the ice." I took my friend to a shooting range or batting cage. It was a great idea. Lance suggested a bike ride, which seemed like a good plan. Colleen was excited, so we packed our bikes into my SUV and headed to the trail. It didn't go as planned. Biking on a first date was a bit of a disaster. It was really sweaty and awkward, and there wasn't much chance to chat when we stopped. We were too busy catching our breath to talk much. I started to worry the date was a bust, and Peace taunt about me being boring echoed in my mind. Then something unexpected happened. A panicked kid ran up to us yelling incoherently. We tried to calm him down, but he was too upset to make sense. Eventually, he motioned for us to follow him when we got to the spot. We saw a man lying on the ground, desperately holding on to someone dangling over a cliff. "They're over there. Please help them," the boy cried. My instincts kicked in. "I'll grab him. You two help the kid," I told the others. Colleen stood back as we pulled them to safety. She watched the son hug his exhausted father. It was incredibly moving. The father whispered something to his son before passing out. Colleen had already called the emergency services when the paramedics arrived. We tried to revive the man but couldn't. The EMTs took over while the police asked us questions before we left. I found a mobile phone on the ground, which I think was the man's. I called a contact, Kara, wife, to inform her and then handed the phone to the police before they left. I thought the date was ruined, but Colleen was thrilled. She said, "Oh my God, you saved that guy and his kid, you're a hero." I tried to. She said it was all three of us, but she shook her head, insisting you acted without hesitation. She said that was the bravest thing she'd ever seen. The date ended with a passionate kiss and the promise of a second date on our second date. We did something more traditional. We talked about our lives. She had 2 kids, one in high school. The date ended with us making out on her porch. Things were going well until the third date on Valentine's Day, when we went to see 50 Shades. I read Grey and it clearly got to her when we got back to her place. She said her kids were away and invited me in. It was obvious what she wanted, but as things heated up all I could hear were PA's hurtful words about my inadequacy. The pressure became overwhelming and I had to stop. "I'm sorry, Colleen, I'm not ready," I said, holding back tears as I rushed out of her apartment, leaving her confused. After that I avoided the gym, or at least tried. I couldn't face her after what happened, so I stuck close to Jerry during workouts, avoiding contact and pretending not to see her. It was childish, but it was all I could do to avoid the humiliation. The situation brought back deep-seated insecurities that Paige had planted. I started imagining that whenever I saw Colleen talking or laughing with someone, they were mocking me. These thoughts isolated me even more, and my workouts began to suffer. Jerry noticed and wasn't happy. "What's up with you?" he snapped. "I'm just not feeling it today," I muttered. He mocked me. "Not feeling it? I want to retire to your chambers," he said. His attitude pushed me over the edge. "Back off, Jerry. I'm not in the mood for your crap," I said. I tried to soften the blow by adding, "I'm just going through a lot. I need a break." He gave me a cold look. He said sarcastically, "So you want to take a break and call me when you feel better?" I knew he was mocking me, but I considered it a break. "It sounded good. I just need you to ease up a bit," I said, hoping for some understanding. I was surprised when he just shrugged and said, "Sure, why not? Yeah, I don't want to waste time on someone who can't get their act together. Let's end our workouts so I can focus on clients who actually care," he said nonchalantly. I asked, stunned, as he walked away. I chased after him, desperate for an explanation. "I've put in a lot of hard work, and I just need one day. Is that too much to ask?" He ignored me, but I kept pressing until he turned and shoved me, pinning me against the machine. His voice dripped with anger. "You know what you are, Arthura. Winner. You expect sympathy because your wife didn't appreciate you. But life doesn't work that way. Winners get back up and prove. People are wrong. Losers whine." Jerry's words cut deep, and I could barely hold back my anger. He looked at me with a smirk and asked, "So what are you, King Arthur? A winner or a winner?" His challenge made my blood boil, but I didn't back down. He pointed to the treadmill and ordered, "Get back on and give me 20 more minutes." Filled with rage, I ran faster than ever, pushing myself to the limit. When the treadmill finally stopped, I stormed off to the locker room, fuming. He followed me and sat down next to me as I caught my breath. After a long pause, he opened up. He told me that he had proposed to his wife 3 times before she said yes. She kept turning him down because she was in love with another man. His voice had a vulnerability I hadn't heard before. I asked who the other man was, and he replied that he was her husband. I was shocked. It turned out she was a widow. No matter what Jerry did, he always felt like he couldn't live up to her late husband. It was a rare moment of honesty from him. I was surprised by how he handled it. I asked him, "How did you react?" He said, "I tried everything to prove I was good enough, but in the end, she only saw me as a good friend." He was really frustrated. He explained that even though he looked like a walking billboard for GNC, everyone faces rejection. "It's not about how you look," he said. "Confidence based on others' approval is shallow. Real worth comes from within." He then shared the lesson he'd learned: if you've done everything you can and it's still not enough, it's not you, it's them. Her rejection didn't make me less worthy, it just meant she couldn't appreciate what I brought to the table. His story made me see him differently. He wasn't just a tough coach, he was human with his own struggles. He explained that after breaking things off with his now wife, she eventually realized what she had lost. And they fought to be together. They've been happily married for 5 years, but he didn't stop there. He mentioned the 80-20 rule, which people often take for granted. They focus on the 20% they're missing, but he believed I was already at 80%. He wanted to make sure I didn't take things for granted. He said, "Push yourself because I don't want you to feel entitled. You're not some pathetic guy who needs pity. You've got strength, determination, and honor. Once you stop seeing yourself through your wife's eyes, you'll realize you're King Arthur. Start acting like it." I went to shower afterwards, letting the warm water soothe my sore muscles. Jerry's words kept coming back to me. He was right. I'd spent too much time judging myself by other standards. I compared myself to Lance because everyone else did. I believed PA's view that I wasn't worth fighting for. My worth at work only felt real when it was validated by others, but life isn't like that. It's really quite simple. There's no formula for self-worth. You have to believe in it, even if others don't. I needed to stop hearing Paige's hurtful words and move on. Weight loss alone wouldn't fix that. It had to come from within. Later that night, I was jolted from a deep sleep by my ringing phone. Groggily, I realized it's 4 a.m. It's 4 p.m. The caller was Lance, who sounded annoyed. I answered with a sarcastic, "What did you wake me for?" He asked, sounding nervous. "You think I snapped?" I woke up fully as I sensed something was off in his voice. "What's wrong?" He hesitated before blurting out, "Julie's pregnant." I frowned in confusion, asking who the hell is Julie? "The girl you met on our birthday." He reminded me. I suddenly remembered the young blonde cheerleader. I raised an eyebrow, asking if she was even legal. Lance got defensive, insisting she was 20 and had her own apartment. "Did you check her ID?" I teased, which only frustrated him more. "Do you always have to be such a smug prick?" He shot back. I retorted, "Do you always have to act like an irresponsible teenager? You're 35 and you got a 20-year-old pregnant. Ever heard of protection?" His voice turned cold. "You know what? Get over yourself. You think you're perfect, always looking down on me. You've always been mom and dad's favorite, the golden boy. Meanwhile, I'm the screw-up." I should have felt some sympathy, but his whining only irritated me more. "Save me, Lance. Everyone worships you. Mom and dad always bail you out, but when my life falls apart, I'm on my own. I was always the one being compared to you." He snapped back, "That's nonsense. Every time they help me, they lecture me to be more like you and you. You act like no one ever helps you, but when your wife cheated, whose couch did you crash on? Who ran interference for me? I've always been there for you, even back in high school. I fought off bullies for you at school, so don't act like you're all alone." I was about to snap back at Lance, but then I stopped. I listened to what he said and it made me realize he was right. Despite our fights and my judgments, he was always there for me when things got tough. I started to see things from his perspective. While I was jealous of him growing up, I never noticed how much my parents bragged about me because I was too focused on how proud they were of him. I always saw him as the tall, good-looking. He was the kind of guy who had it easy, but from his perspective, after dropping out of college, he constantly felt like a failure. Our parents always stepped in to help him because they didn't believe he could do it himself, which must have been really tough for him. He was scared because he had a baby on the way and felt incapable of handling it, so he called me, his twin brother, for support. What did I do? I treated him like crap. "You're right, Lance," I said without sarcasm or malice. He wasn't expecting that and was caught off guard. I took the chance to elaborate. "You've always been there for me, no matter what. You've always been the guy I turned to for support." "Thanks," he replied, sounding confused. I changed the subject, asking how far along she was. He said she was a couple of months along. "She just told me today." "Are you two keeping it?" He said the decision was a big one. "How do you feel about that?" "Admitting I'm scared. How do I raise a kid I still live like one? I'm not like you. Josh and Ally are lucky to have a dad like you. What's my kid going to think of me?" I remember having the same fears when Paige was pregnant. "Lance, stop comparing yourself to me. That's the mistake I always made with you. Believe it or not, I've always been jealous." "Lance, I'm surprised at you. What are you talking about?" "I'm not jealous of you. You've got your life together, especially now that you've lost weight." I laughed at the irony. "That's just it. Lance, neither of us should be jealous of the other. I'm trying to work on my insecurities. Why can't you?" If you want to be responsible, then be responsible. If you want to be a good dad, learn how to be one. It's easier said than done. You're right, it does take work, but if anyone can do it, you can. You're one of the strongest people I know. I'd bet on you any day. He asked, genuinely surprised. Absolutely, and I meant it. Lance might have been irresponsible at times, but I thought he'd outgrow it, and I had a feeling the time was now. We talked for another 2 hours, and the more we did, the more I believed he'd be a great dad. He wasn't handling the situation like everything else. He was worried and thinking about how his actions would affect his child. That's what all good fathers do. I shared my own parenting failures, hoping that some stories made us laugh, while others were cautionary tales. I joked that fate would probably give him a girl as karma, and he laughed at that. I promised to be there for him in whatever way he needed, and I meant it. By the time we hung up, the sun was rising. Something had shifted in me during that conversation. I wasn't jealous of my brother anymore. It wasn't because I realized he was as jealous of me as I was of him. It was because I started seeing myself differently. I was the responsible one, the smart one. Those were qualities I should have been proud of. They were my 80%, and I didn't need the other 20%. I was fine just the way I was. I got up and prepared. I was feeling better than I had in a long time when I went back to work. After that, weeks turned into months and my outlook brightened. The one downside was that Jerry felt like I didn't need him anymore. My weight loss had been so successful that there was no trace of my old self, but the real reason he moved on was because I saw myself differently. My confidence was up, and that had been his main goal all along. Looking back, I saw how calculated his plan was: the snarky comments, the tough workouts, the relentless attitude. It was all to stop me from seeing myself as a victim of fate's cruel joke. Honestly, he was worth every penny I should have paid him during our final bittersweet workout. Colleen came to a head. I got distracted when she walked by and Jerry noticed you staring at her. He asked if I was going to just keep staring or actually talk to her. I hadn't even realized I was staring until he pointed it out. Sorry, Jerry. I'm getting back to lifting. I mumbled, doing some arm curls and slamming the weights back on the rack. He said, carefully. I'm not trying to interfere, but it's obvious you want to talk to her. Whatever happened, it can't be worth all this effort to pretend she doesn't exist. I looked around, embarrassed. Am I that obvious? Was that supposed to be subtle? He snickered, seeing my horrified expression. Just go talk to her. I can't. After what happens, she'll. He shrugged and stopped staring at her from across the room. That was more effective. His smugness was infuriating, but I knew he was right. I saw Colleen heading to the locker room and swallowed my fear. I hurried to catch her. Hey Colleen, I called out. She turned immediately, looking uncomfortable as she stared at the floor. Hey Arthur, she said quickly. She didn't seem very confident, but I pushed through the awkwardness. How have you been? I asked. My voice betrayed my nervousness. Pretty good, she replied without meeting my eyes. I gathered my courage and said, listen, I was hoping we could talk and clear the air. She nodded quickly. When did you want to talk? I took a chance. Are you free now? Well, I need to shower first, but we can talk after that. Okay, yeah, sure. I replied, relieved as she disappeared into the locker room. I exhaled, glad I'd gotten through the awkward exchange. Jerry was talking to Naomi nearby and gave me a thumbs up, signaling his approval. After we both showered, we met at a nearby Golden Corral as we ate. I struggled. To start the conversation, we made small talk to fill the silence, but I could see she was getting impatient. Finally, I took a deep breath and said, I wanted to talk about that night. You know, when things almost happened. She shifted uncomfortably, shaking her head. You don't have to explain. It's fine. It's not the first time a man hasn't been attracted to me. I'm used to it. My husband wasn't either. I'll get over it. I was stunned. Yeah, she sighed with a sad smile. He used to call me Piggy and poke my stomach, even in front of his friends. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she tried to rush to the bathroom, but I grabbed her hands. Colleen, you've got it all wrong. She looked up, and my heart broke seeing her pain. Your ex was an idiot. I don't know what his problem was, but that's not how I think I'm attracted to you. You're fun and beautiful. So why? I took a deep breath and told her everything, my story, my fears, my past. She listened without interrupting when I finished. Her reaction shocked me. She burst into uncontrollable laughter. What are you laughing at? I asked, horrified. This was exactly what I feared. She managed to stifle her laughter and stop. I'm not laughing at you, she said, catching her breath. I'm laughing at us and this whole situation. Both of our spouses told us we were fat, ugly, and bad in bed. Your ex called you boring too. I asked, chuckling, and she nodded, trying to suppress another laugh. Soon we were both laughing so hard we couldn't stop, ignoring the funny looks from people around us and the conversation. It turned into a competition of who had the worst insults from their ex. She won, though, only because her ex had been at it longer. At least, Paige kept her disdain hidden until the end. Well, today turned out differently than I expected, she said with a smile. I worried I came on too strong and scared you away. I really liked you and didn't want you to see me like he did. I wanted to feel special, even if just for one night, so I went all out when you didn't. I felt like a failure. I smiled back. I get it. I was so focused on not being what Paige said I was that I ended up proving her right. Talking to Colleen helped. It was comforting to share with someone who had gone through the same rejection. I didn't feel so alone. So what do two? So I joked that they were losers who were bad in bed. She replied with a grin, then added, Hi, my name is Colleen, and I'm bad in bed. I replied, Hi Colleen, trying not to laugh as we sat together. Despite all the bad things life throws at us, I realized how much we had in common. Sometimes, it surprises you with something good, you just have to be open to it. I suggested, let's forget proving our exes wrong. Let's go out again. No pressure, no expectations. Just have fun and get to know each other. She smiled. I like that, no pressure, just fun. Then she added with a playful smirk, and if we happen to sleep together, so be it. I nearly fell out of my chair laughing, but her words sparked something in me. I felt more relaxed and connected to her. Yeah, if it happens, I joked, crossing my fingers. We clinked our cups in a toast, unaware that someone familiar was watching us. By the time I noticed she had already left, I wouldn't learn about this until weeks later. Why does Paige make everything so difficult? I thought. As I stood in her bedroom doorway, I was trying not to lose my cool. Every time I tried to move forward, another obstacle appeared. She was dragging her feet on signing the divorce papers, which was frustrating. We'd talked about it numerous times, but she always brushed it off like it didn't matter. Her indifferent attitude made me angry. I was fed up with being tied to her, even when I tried to move on. Her words haunted me. I wanted her out of my life, but as always, it had to happen on her terms. Paige, what's the problem? I asked impatiently. As she sat in bed putting on lotion, she had the nerve to look smug in new lingerie. She said, You can't expect me to sign papers without a lawyer looking them over. I've been looking for a lawyer for a month. How can I review the documents if I don't have them? She looked exasperated. I haven't found a lawyer yet. Artie, when I do, I'll give them to him. Now, calm down. You'll wake the kids. Sit down and relax. You look stressed. She said, patting the bed. I counted to 5. I was trying not to explode. What do you mean you haven't found a lawyer yet? She looked surprised by my tone. I wasn't expecting you to just drop the papers on me. I thought we'd talk about it first. I'm pretty sure we covered everything when you called me a fat, boring loser who's bad in bed. Artie, she whined, gearing up for another round of the same old argument. I was tired of it, so I steered the conversation back on track. When do you plan on getting a lawyer? Have you even been looking? Instead of answering, she turned it around on me. Why? The sudden rush you didn't seem to care about before. Are you kidding me? You're the one who wanted this divorce. You found me so repulsive that you sought out other men. Now I'm giving you what you want, and you're making it hard for me. Why her? Her attitude softened. I'm not trying to make this difficult for you, she said, genuinely, and maybe she was telling the truth. She'd never intentionally made things harder during our separation, but trust was in short supply. Then sign the papers. They're as fair as I could make them. She hesitated. I think we should talk first, Paige. There's nothing left to discuss. I lost my patience. She fell silent, realizing that yelling wouldn't help. I took a deep breath. Look, I'm not trying to screw you over. I'm just trying to move on, but I can't do that with the weight of our marriage is holding me down. It's too much. I didn't mean to be that honest, but the words just came out when I looked at her. I saw her eyes welling up. I'm sorry, Artie. I've been really terrible to you, she admitted. I didn't respond, I just listened when she realized. I wasn't saying anything. She asked if I could forgive her. Could I forgive her? Could I move past that day that seemed to define everything over time? The pain faded, and that day became just a few paragraphs in my past. I do forgive you, Paige. She smiled, relieved. She asked, yes? Now I just want to move forward. Relief washed over her face. That's all I've wanted to know. You forgive me. I added, great. Now you can sign the papers with a clear conscience. Her smile faded. I was disappointed and then angry. I thought, are you just saying what I want to hear to get me to sign? I was taken aback when she stood close, the scent of eucalyptus lotion strong. Who is she? She demanded, glaring at me. I asked who she was, still confused, stepping back as she closed the gap between us. Gap, the woman you've been seeing. Who is she? I wondered how she knew about Colleen. Then it hit me, she was jealous. The nerve of it made me laugh, which only fueled her anger. Is this funny to you? She snapped, yeah, it is. The hypocrisy is pretty hilarious. She ignored my remark. Who is she? She repeated. I didn't owe her an answer, but I gave her one, someone I met at the gym. Her response was dripping with irony. The gym, of course. How do you know about her? I shifted the focus. She hesitated, then admitted, I saw you at Golden Corral a few weeks ago, laughing with her. I got curious, so I went through your phone. You went through my phone. I gasped, feeling violated. She wasn't my wife anymore. Yeah, I saw texts from a woman named Colleen and connected the dots. I almost got indignant, but remembered. Instead of getting into a fight, I just shrugged. It doesn't matter. We're separated. You're with Derek. Did you expect me to stay celibate while you enjoyed being single? Her anger flickered, but faded quickly. She seemed to realize her own hypocrisy. I guess I didn't think about you with someone else. She admitted softly, a hint of sadness in her voice. Instead of feeling vindicated, I felt offended. Oh, so because you didn't want me, you thought no one else would? I shot back, you're putting words in my mouth. Speak for yourself. I countered them. She almost argued but stopped herself. Then, in a quieter tone, she confessed, you're right, Artie. I didn't think another woman would be interested, but now that you've lost weight. She didn't finish the sentence, but the message was clear. Here, when I was overweight, she didn't worry about other women. Now that I was fit and attractive, it was a problem too. It's too bad, but it doesn't matter, Paige. You're with Derek. You don't have the right to be jealous. A shadow crossed her face as she admitted, Derek and I broke up a while ago. I tried to sound She seemed casual, but her expression revealed something deeper. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't want to gloat or offer fake sympathy, so I simply asked why she looked like she wanted to vent but held back. People meet, have fun, and then it's over. Not everyone rides off into the sunset. She sighed, sitting on the bed and staring at the floor. We were supposed to. I said quietly, realizing too late that I'd spoken aloud. Yeah, we were. She agreed, her eyes glistening, but somewhere along the way, we lost the connection. It became all chores, bills, and I messed up and now everything's ruined. The twins are struggling and I'm stuck looking at old photos, wishing I could go back. Derek wasn't our problem, we were. He was just a symptom of the deeper issues in our marriage. I sat beside her. We both made mistakes, but we can only move forward from here. She turned to me and I could see in her eyes that she was seeing me in a new light. She took a deep breath, grabbed my hand and said, I made a mistake. I made a mistake giving up on us, on you, Paige. I tried to pull my hand away, but she held on tight. Her eyes seemed to search my soul, and a mix of emotions played across her face. Then, as if making a sudden decision, she grabbed my face and kissed me. Her hands, once familiar, pushed me back onto the bed. Paige, what are you doing? I asked, confused. Artie, don't talk. Just do this with me, she whispered, a smile on her face as she kissed my neck. I almost gave in, but then Derek's image flashed in my mind, a reminder of our broken relationship. I said firmly, pushing her away. She fell back on the bed, surprised. Artie, no, she started, but I interrupted, jumping up like the bed was on fire. You can't keep doing this to me, Paige. I'm not your backup plan. You can't just come back when things don't work out with your boyfriend. You dumped me and now you can't change your mind. She sat in silence for a moment, then asked softly, do you still love me? I hesitated, caught off guard by the question. My response should have been easy after everything she'd put me through, but it wasn't. I hesitated, hoping she'd stop. She was holding both my hands. Be honest with yourself. Don't let pride answer for you. I thought about our past, the dates, the wedding, the birth of our twins. I realized I did love that version of Paige, but this pig, the one who had hurt me so deeply, was different, yet they were the same person. It was a complicated feeling, but I knew my answer. No, Paige. Not that way. Not anymore. The weight of those words hung in the air. The phrase that had once crushed me now left her devastated. Tears streamed down her face as she backed away. She sat on the bed and cried, away from me like I was a stranger. I felt for her. I knew that pain all too well. You're lying, she said, refusing to believe me. I know you still love me, she said. I'm sorry, but I don't, I said gently. Too much has happened, she said. Her sobs filled the room. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. Should I comfort her or just leave? I just stood there, letting her process her emotions. After a few minutes, she wiped her tears and looked at me with a mix of anger and sadness. You're enjoying this, aren't you? She said. No, I replied. You're telling me you don't love me. She was putting me in my place after what I did. Her words were laced with bitterness, and they stung a bit, but I took a moment to think. While I didn't enjoy her suffering, there was a sense of justice in the air. After everything she'd put me through, it felt like the scales had finally. I said calmly, I suppose I could say I did enjoy it. Would you really blame me? She looked ready to argue, but I raised my hand to stop her. Just listen. You gave up on me, Paige. You cheated, ridiculed me, and asked for a divorce, but I still stood by you. I didn't expose you to the kids or make divorces messy. I let you live your life with Derek without complaining, even after all that. You didn't find anything worth fighting for in me, but now that I've lost a few pounds, you do. It's not just the weight. I'm more attracted to you now, but you're also more confident and go out and do things. This is the you I've been wanting all along. The last sentence hit me hard. She wanted me to be someone else because I wasn't enough for her. She still didn't get it, and I doubted she ever would. I could have argued with her about how flawed her logic was, expecting me to change without giving us a chance. But what was the point? I no longer needed her to see things from my perspective for the first time. I truly didn't care what she thought. I was finally free. "Do us both a favor, Paige," I said firmly, signing the papers. "Dragging this out isn't helping either of us." Without waiting for a response, I left the room, hearing her cry as I walked away. 6 months later, it was official. The divorce papers in my hand were the only reminder of my life with Paige. Aside from the 2 kids now arguing over the remote in the living room, "Josh, ally, don't make me come out there," I called from my bedroom. Their shouting turned into hushed bickering. I sighed, refolding the documents and slipping them back into the envelope. No matter how much I've moved on from the finality of divorce. It's the closing of a chapter, a bittersweet mix of pain and a fresh start. My phone buzzed with a message from Colleen. "What are you up to, lover?" I smiled and texted back, thinking of her. I can't wait to see her again. Last night had been It was our first time together, and the memories made me grin. We'd taken things slow, dating and spending time at each other's places, even introducing our kids. Paige had been the only one to make a big deal out of it, citing our agreement to keep our relationships away from the kids. Technically, she was right, but we both knew what really bothered her. I'd apologized and promised not to do it again until we were officially divorced, and that day had finally arrived. I replied, remembering the warmth of her body against mine. Her ex, I guess my husband was crazy to call her boring. I dropped the kid off at Paige's. Her puffy eyes told me she had received the same papers. We made brief eye contact before the kid's chatter pulled her attention. She gave me a weak smile and closed the door, driving to my brother's place. I reflected on life. I'd been spending more time with Lance lately, supporting him as he navigated a significant change in his life. Today was Julie's baby shower. Lance wanted to be there, but he didn't want to be the only guy. He wanted to be the only guy, so he asked me to join him. I rearranged my schedule to back him up. When I arrived, my mom greeted me with a big smile and a hug. She called me over and said, "Hey Art, ladies, it's my other son, the newly single one." I went out and blushed as the room cheered after dropping off my gift. I found Julie on the couch. "Hey, Prar. How's my nephew?" I joked. She giggled. "We don't know yet. It could be your niece." Lance interrupted. "It's a nephew," I laughed, teasing him about karma. I stayed to help clean up at the shower, and my mom watched me curiously. She said, "There's something different about you lately." I replied, "I can't explain it, but I like it." She continued, "When I heard Julie was having Lance's baby, I worried about him. He's not like you. We never had to worry about you. You were always going to be okay. But Lance, he's different. Lance is stronger than you think. He'll be fine." I reassured her, and she smiled, tears in her eyes. "I know I'm proud of both of you." She gave me a big hug when Lance returned. By the time I'd finished cleaning up, I was excited for my date with Colleen. As I started my car, I pulled down the visor to shield my eyes from the sunset. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I saw a man who was responsible, loving, smart, hardworking, and a good father. I saw a man who genuinely wanted to be good and worked hard for it. That was the real man in the mirror.